talks about the book of Daniel, one chapter at a time. So again, let's get cracking. Today, the last session of the book of Daniel, the time of the end. About chapter 11 and 12. Chapter 11, pretty long chapter with a lot of details, and chapter 12, well, let's take a look, it's very important as well. Follow-up of Daniel 10. Last time we spoke about this special encounter Daniel had with the Lord himself. And we're going to look behind the scenes. A battle rages on earth and for the earth and its inhabitants. In Revelation we read more about it and how all this will end. Before we start reading in chapter 11, we first start in Daniel 10. This last verse of Daniel 10 says something very important. Let's look again. Daniel 10 verse 21. But I will tell you what is not noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael your prince. And in 2a it says, now I will tell you the truth. So the scripture of truth, and the Lord is going to tell the truth. About what? About all the things that are going to happen. And they're in the Lord's hands. Remember. So God writes history, remember, his story, amidst what people do. Behind it, there's a battle in the heavenlies. Sometimes it seems things run out of hand. We often don't see how God could turn things, certain things we worry about, around for good. But he can. He does. As we read in Romans 8 verse 28. Let's read it. Romans 8 verse 28. A very important verse for all of us, especially for those who love the Lord. Romans 8 verse 28. And we know that all things, not just some things, but all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So if you know you belong to the Lord, you can rely on this. Everything works together for good. But it seems to be a personal truth, but it's also general, and especially for the people of Israel. Daniel 11 is largely about the time after Daniel up to the Maccabees. So that's history for us. It's written down with so much detail that many state that it's unthinkable that Daniel could have written this down in advance. Still, there are enough reasons to assume this book was written by Daniel just after the Babylonian time, the beginning of the Persian Empire. The thought that it was written in the time of the Maccabees, well, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that was done a century before the Maccabees. And we find, of course, the book of Daniel there as well. Let's read the first 4 verses of Daniel 11. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, that's the Lord himself, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Him is Michael. And I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. that a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And but when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. So here we find the first lines, and it's important to note a few things. First of all, after Cyrus, and Daniel writes just in the beginning of the reign of Cyrus, there are three more kings: Cambyses, Darius Hystaspes, and finally Xerxes. Xerxes is the king, a great king, who we see in the book of Esther. And he attacks the Greeks without success. We can know when he did this in the book of Esther is chapter 1. Then the description here in these first 4 verses jumps about 130 years to Alexander the Great, because it's very clear that the mighty king in verse 3 is Alexander the Great, so the Greek king. So it's no longer about empires, but about different kings. Chapter 11 speaks about. So what follows in verse 5 to 19 is about 2 of the 4 empires after Alexander. 2 of these 4 empires are important. Why? Because they were important for the land of Israel. And it's the kings of Syria, the Seleucids, and Egypt, the Ptolemies. And God shows what is coming. He shows what is coming because he knows beforehand what is coming. Let's read it in Isaiah 46. Isaiah 46 verse 9 and 10. We read the following. And it's only one of the examples in Isaiah, because in these chapters 40 to 48 we find more of this truth, but these 2 verses stand out. 46 verse 9 and 10. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. The Lord, it's all about the glorious land. Israel, Jerusalem. That's what it's all about. That's the center of his attention. From 11 verse 20, he speaks about Antiochus Epiphanes. And he seems to be an important guy because he does something, well, awful to Jerusalem, and especially to the temple. So let's read from verse 31 to 39. We don't read everything, but from verse 31 to 39. It says, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices, that's an important thing, and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue, by flattery. And some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white, until the time of the end, because it's still for the appointed time. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So, if you have listened carefully, you will already have seen that some of it at least also applies to the time of the end. That's important. Antiochus Epiphanes is also a picture of somebody else. There is this desecration of the temple, that's what we read. And the daily offering ceases. That's also what we read. And that's a very important thing. It's not the first time we read about it. We also read about it in chapter 8. And the abomination of desolation, well, an abomination is an idol, a false god. And the first fulfillment is, of course, in the time of the Maccabees, especially chapter 11, verse 32 to 34. People who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits, or, as NIV says, will firmly resist him. And that's about the Maccabees. Many will join them with intrigue, or as the NIV says, who are not sincere. We are told what will be right in their actions, but also what will go wrong. Wrong motives also play a part there. So the time of the Maccabees is a very special time, and it's still remembered. Remembered this cleansing of the temple. But in 1135 we read, until the time of the end. So then we see there's a double fulfillment. Antiochus Epiphanes is, as it were, a picture of what is going to happen later on, and more elaborate in the end time. You read that he shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. That's verse 36. And we see that in Revelation, that the Antichrist, or the little horn in Daniel 7, also speaks blasphemies. We also read, he shall regard neither the God or gods. That's the same. Elohim can either be translated with God, because God himself, the God of Scripture, is Elohim, but it also applies to the gods. Plural, because it's a plural word. Of his fathers. And he also doesn't regard the desire of the women. And the desire of the women is, of course, the fulfillment of the promise to Eve. The fulfillment in the Messiah. So he is Antichrist, because he doesn't regard the God of his fathers, meaning he must be an Israelite, and he also doesn't regard the desire of the women. That's how we see that this Antiochus Epiphanes is a picture of somebody who will come later. Antiochus Epiphanes wasn't an Israelite, but he's a picture of one who will be Antichrist. And he will magnify himself, set himself in a temple and show he's God. 2 Thessalonians 2 tells us this. And the God of the fortresses could be pointing to the worship of the beast, the political head of the Roman Empire. And he will put up a statue. So some of these things must be about the future. It wasn't fulfilled completely in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And if you take a look at verse 40, that also speaks about the time of the end. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through, etc. Then he shall enter the glorious land. Verse 41. So from verse 40 onwards, it's getting harder and harder to apply all this to Antiochus Epiphanes. It must be somebody else, what it points to. It's time of the end. So what happens in the time of the end? Well, we're not informed completely, and I won't go into all the details. But let's take a look at chapter 12. Chapter 12 of Daniel. And we read it completely. At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. And one said to the man clothed in linen, the Lord himself, who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. Again, this expression. And when the power of the holy people that has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, My Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. So this is clearly about the end, the time of the end. Michael shall stand up. We shall also see him in Revelation chapter 12. And he fights against Satan, and Satan is thrown out of heaven. And that is the start of a time of greater stress for Israel. We will see that in Revelation 12. We also see that in Jeremiah chapter 30. Let's take a look. Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 7. It says about this time for Jacob. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it, and it's the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So that's what we read here as well. And in Matthew 24, verse 21, we find also about that same time, because the Lord Jesus himself speaks about this time. That's why we know it's not about something that is already fulfilled in the time of the Maccabees. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not has been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And it resembles very much what we read here in chapter 12, verse 1. Such as never was there since there was a nation. So your people will be delivered. That's what we see in Revelation 12 verse 6 also. And we see that in Jeremiah 30 verse 7. And we also read something like it in Matthew 24. But that doesn't mean that everybody, every Israelite will be delivered. No, there's a choice. There's also a choice in the time of the Maccabees. There's always a choice. There's a choice in the time of Jesus. The choice, do you agree? Do you side with the Messiah or against him? Verse 2 speaks about the resurrection. And there is its double resurrection. One is to life and the other is to contempt. And John 5 verse 29 says something like it. Let's read that as well. John 5 verse 29 says, verse 28 I start reading. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice, the voice of the Son of Man, and come forth, resurrection. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. These are two different resurrections. In Revelation 20, we see them at the beginning, the first, to life, and at the end, the second, to condemnation. And you can compare with Isaiah 66, verse 24. Let's take a look. Where it speaks about what happens. They shall go forth and look upon the corpses of men who have transgressed against me. For their worm doesn't die and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. There is a resurrection to contempt, to condemnation. And in Mark 9 verse 44, 46, 48 we find similar expressions. Verse 4 speaks about sealing up in here in Daniel 12. Different from Revelation, because there John is told not to seal the book, because the time is at hand. The time of the end actually has already started in some way. Of course, the complete fulfillment of the last week, the last 7 years, still awaits us. So this time of the end, the last week of Daniel, last 7 years, is still before us. But in some way, Antichrist already works. That's what John in his letter tells us. Verse 5 to 7 speak about 3.5 years. Again, we already spoke about it earlier on. But there's an extra time in verse 11 and 12. An extra time that we also could discern in Revelation 16 maybe. In verse 10 we read about the purifying and refinement. Compare verse 3. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn men into righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Those who are wise will understand, and they will be purified, made white, and refined. But the wicked shall do wickedly. Verse 10. And that's what we see happening nowadays as well. And it will be more so in the time of the end, in these last days. Wickedness and blindness will increase. But also purification and refinement, being more holy. Just like Revelation 22 verse 11 tells us. Let's look at it for a moment, and then we will close off our thoughts about Daniel. 22 verse 11, the Revelation. He who is unjust, let him be unjust still. He who is filthy, let him be filthy still. If you want to be that, God gives you what you want. He who is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he who is holy, let him be holy still. So, is that our desire? Our desire when we go towards the time of the end, and we have not a sealed book like Daniel had. He couldn't understand everything. But we have an open book, Revelation. And I hope to do a next series of talks about this wonderful book, Revelation. And the Lord himself, showing himself to Daniel in his last part, is the center of that book. He is the one who will be victorious. He is the one who will reign. He is the one who has his attention to the glorious land, to the people of Israel. And those who will serve him will be saved. Our lesson is, the whole history is in his hand. His story, remember? And we are in his hands as well, personally. So let's dedicate ourselves to him. He is worth it. He is the King of Kings who is to come.